I want to start by talking about the communication basics. You're going to hear me today say some things that you're going to roll your eyes and say, well, that is ridiculously obvious. Why is she wasting my time saying this? But every day of the week, I have couples in my office for counseling because they have neglected or forgotten one of these ridiculously obvious communication basics. So I just want to reiterate them and hope you will keep them in mind for when you are having a communication breakdown or a communication challenge, that it's often the most very basic, seemingly obvious things that we forget that really help us get through a difficult communication. I also want to mention that the techniques that I am going to be talking about are just as useful for heterosexual relationships as for queer relationships. They're just as useful for kinky relationships as vanilla relationships, and as useful for poly relationships as for monogamous relationships. I usually teach this as a 4-hour class and kind of separate out some things that are more specific for certain types of relationship. But this class tonight is, since Zach has only given me an hour instead of my usual 4-hour class, I had to kind of condense it. So we're just going to stick to the things that are really useful for all types of relationships. And then at the very end, I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes just about a few specific polyamory communication challenges for any of you in the audience who may be involved in that. So keep in mind, again, the most basic things are often the ones we forget. And I was just reading recently in the Rolling Stone, of all places, they were interviewing Madonna, our material girl Madonna, about her latest marriage problems in her latest marriage with her latest husband, whoever that is, who I can't remember his name. But she was quoted as saying, poor communication or lack of communication leads to lots of expensive shrink sessions and lots of caca. So keep that in mind. Madonna, you heard it here first. It's a very highly technical term. If you don't want to experience lots of expensive shrink sessions and lots of caca, then be careful about your communication and learn how to communicate better. So I want to talk first about what is the goal of communication. That, again, may seem like you're going to roll your eyes and say, that is so ridiculously obvious. Why is she even mentioning that? But the reality is a lot of people have very different goals when they communicate. And often people are at cross purposes when they are trying to communicate, and they're trying to achieve different goals, and it doesn't work. And so you might even ask, well, why was communication invented? What is it that we're trying to achieve when we do communicate? And plenty of people have weighed in on that important question. My favorite lesbian comedian, Lily Tomlin, has a theory that Homo sapiens developed language because of our primal need to complain, and that the only reason we ever started talking was because we have such an innate desire and need to whine, and we just had to express that, and so we had to invent language. And another comedian and philosopher, the late, great Robin Williams, had a different theory. He said he believed that heterosexual males invented language, and they invented it because they discovered that it increased their chances of getting laid regularly if they talked to a woman, and they were much more likely to get lucky and have sex, so that they were forced to develop verbal language. And far be it from me to argue with these great philosophers, but my experience is that when people are communicating, they are trying to achieve one of 5 goals. And I'm going to point your attention to one of the sheets that you have. The first sheet is the agenda of some of the areas we're going to cover today, and we've condensed that agenda. We're not going to cover everything on it, or we'd be here till quite late. But the second page says communication exercises, and the first one says, what is the goal of communication? Everybody got that? What is the goal of communication? There are usually 5 different reasons that people communicate. And the first one is just to make a connection and to create intimacy. Sometimes when people are talking, that's the main thing they're trying to do through communication, is just to create a connection, just create intimacy with their partner or whoever they're talking to. The second key goal of communication is to just impart information or tell a story. You're just kind of reporting information to someone, the information they need, or you're telling a story just because people love telling yarns and stories about their lives and other things. So that's the second goal that some people have when they're communicating. A third goal of communication is asking for or offering support or acknowledgement or endearment. You're trying to show that you care and you're trying to give someone support, or you're asking your partner for some kind of support or acknowledgement, either support because you're hurting or you're asking for acknowledgement for something you did or acknowledgement about who you are as a person. And the fourth goal of communication is that sometimes people are trying to make a decision. They're using communication, they're talking to someone in order to try to make a decision. Either they want that person's advice or help, or they want to make a decision together. And that's especially common with couples. There are a lot of decisions that you need to make together as a couple when you're in a relationship. The fifth goal of communication is to solve a problem. And again, that can be you're trying to solve a problem and you just want someone to give you advice on how to solve it, or you want someone else to solve that problem with you as a team. And sometimes making a decision and solving a problem are the same thing, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes you just need to make a decision like, should we go to Hawaii on our vacation? It's not really a problem to solve, it's a decision to make. But oftentimes the two are the same, where you're trying to make a decision that will solve a problem, or in the process of solving the problem you need to make a decision. And the problem comes in if you have one of those goals and your partner has a different goal. And this happens a lot in relationships. It's especially common in heterosexual relationships, because people who were raised and indoctrinated as female have a tendency to communicate with the first three goals in mind, either to create intimacy or connection, to tell a story, or to ask for support or offer support. People who were raised and socialized or indoctrinated as male from birth to adulthood have a tendency to be communicating more often to make a decision or solve a problem. And so if you're trying to just ask for support, but your partner thinks you're trying to solve a problem and gives you advice, it can make you feel invalidated and unsupported, and it makes them feel like, well, I'm trying to help you, and yet you're not appreciating it. Instead, you're getting mad at me. In my experience, this is the quintessential heterosexual communication breakdown, where one person has one goal, the other has another. It just as often will happen if the man is trying to make a decision or solve a problem, and instead the woman thinks he's just trying to create intimacy, or just is asking her for support and acknowledgement, and she starts giving him all this praise and support, and he's saying, well, that's not helping me solve this problem or make this decision. So I want to give a disclaimer that I certainly know there are more than two genders out there in the world, and that not everybody goes by their gender stereotypes, but our gender training and indoctrination is very powerful and starts essentially at birth and goes throughout our lives. So we are generally influenced by it more than we like to admit, however we were indoctrinated in terms of gender roles. So I had a heterosexual couple coming to see me for couples counseling, and the wife was telling me that she would get very upset because she would be talking about something, and her husband would say, honey, should I be listening to this, or are you just talking? And she was very upset by that, but the fact is he had a very accurate and valid question. What he was trying to figure out was, should I be listening very carefully to the facts and figures of this discussion, because in a minute you're going to ask me to help you solve a problem or make a decision. So should I be paying really close attention to all the details, or should I just be kind of listening to the flow of things and trying to get a sense of of what you need because you're just wanting to tell me a story or you just are trying to connect with me. So he really did have a good point, but I think that often happens that one person feels very invalidated by the other person's response. So I want to give you one example to show just how difficult it is to guess what your partner really is trying to communicate, what their goal is in communication. For instance, I had a couple for couples counseling. In this case was a lesbian couple, and the one woman said, the boss snapped at me at work today, and I'm feeling anxious about it. And so we went through these 5 goals, and said, well, she could have said, the boss snapped at me and I'm anxious about it, because she just was trying to connect and create intimacy and tell her partner kind of what was going on with her. Or she could have been making that same statement just to tell a story and report the information because it was something that happened that day at work. Or thirdly, she could have been saying, the boss snapped at me and I'm anxious about it because she needed support and was feeling really vulnerable and just wanted to be held or wanted some support or acknowledgement. Or she could have made that same statement because she wanted help in making a decision that she was thinking, well, maybe I should quit my job and get another job. Or she could have made that statement because she wanted help solving a problem, like because she said, the boss snapped at me and I'm anxious about it. Maybe she's fearful that she's going to lose her job or fearful that she's going to be called into a meeting with the boss or something, and she wants help in solving a problem. So that's just one very simple example, but almost any time you're trying to communicate, it's difficult for your partner to guess which of those 5 goals they're trying to achieve. So that's why I suggest that if you are trying to deliver a communication to your partner that is particularly important, or that you are particularly concerned your partner might misinterpret your goal, a way to avoid that is to do what I call meta-communicating. And all that means, just a simple way of saying communicate about communicating. I ask couples to say, okay, I'm thinking of communicating this. What is my goal? Which of those 5 is my goal? And then tell your partner, I have this goal in communicating this piece of information to you, and I just want to tell you the goal before I deliver it. And then deliver the communication, and you would be amazed at how much more likely it is that your partner will actually be much more on the same page with you in terms of the goal. Now, obviously, people don't talk this way all the time. It's not like every time you open your mouth, you've got to think about that. It's more if you have a communication, particularly an issue where in the past it's often caused arguments, or in the past you've been particularly frustrated with trying to communicate this type of issue with your partner, that's the time to meta-communicate, to just decide I'm going to figure out what my goal is and tell my partner the goal before I actually tell them what the communication is. So that is the 5 goals of communication, and I find that a very useful exercise to have people try this at home. And part of the reason I gave you these sheets is there are several exercises and techniques on these sheets, and because the class is short tonight, we won't have time to have you sit there and do these exercises for 25 or 30 minutes at each exercise. So you'll get a lot more benefit from the class if you will commit to going home and sometime in the next couple weeks, commit yourself to spending even an hour doing a couple of these exercises, either on your own or with your partner, so that you have we'll get a lot more out of the class because we're not having time to actually do the exercises and techniques today. So that's why I gave you all these pieces of paper, and there are several different exercises on there that we're going to just talk a little about but not actually do.